We're holding a webinar on learning sciences, and we have two wonderful guests. Our first guest is Elliott Washer from Big Picture Learning. He's the co-founder and co-director of Big Picture Learning, and he's based in San Diego, USA. And we also have Rogers Kamushiya. He's the National Design and Training Manager at Educate, based in Rwanda. And I'm Ondine Bulow. I'm the moderator today. I'm the CEO and founder of Better Kids. We know a lot about our brains, and yet we know very little. In the past decades, there's been huge progress in terms of MRIs and EEG for looking at brain activity. And we do know that we have 100 billion neurons in our brains and as many glial cells. So the part that neuroscientists have been able to explore over the past decades is still very marginal. Yet, given the little things we know, we're going to be focusing today on what are the key findings that have occurred over the past decades and how can we apply them to products that are developed, to the classroom, and to better support the learners throughout their lives. And of course, we'll give examples of how we all do it on a daily basis, and how any teacher can be active in this process. This webinar is organized by WISE. WISE is the World Innovation Summit for Education. It's a network of educators and educator stakeholders from 200 countries around the world. So hello to everyone. And we hope you find this webinar valuable and that it will help you better understand and spark your curiosity as to the different discoveries that have been made on the brain and the ways we learn. So first of all, let's go around and hear from our guests today.
Okay. As you had, our presenter today had said, my name is Kamugisha Elliotts Patrick, hailing on from Rwanda, Kigali. Greetings from Rwanda. Anyhow, at Educate, we are a skills-based organization. We promote skills-based learning by partnering with schools and governments to inform how and what teachers teach. And the main aim of that is to be able to build young leaders and entrepreneurs who will be able to solve community problems, who will be able to start up projects for themselves and realize the need of education. Looking, for instance, from our experience, we have managed to successfully work with government through partnerships. And the main purpose why we work with governments is to make sure that we influence policies and curriculum frameworks so that whatever is taught is already indicated in policy documents. And then again, we provide technical expertise and advice to the governments as well on the ongoing curriculum reforms. If today in the 21st century, we are looking at 21st century skills. And so we're making sure that whatever that is in the curriculums is well aligned to the expectations of the skills required today. Again, I would say that teachers as well need that support. That's why we have at Educate, we have, I would call it training model that is meant to proceed, supporting and working closely with teachers, making sure that we are able to understand their needs and give them continued support in the areas where they lack accordingly, in the lines of pedagogy, Yes. So yeah, that's it. Maybe I would hear from my counterpart, and then we'll hit it there as we exchange different experiences.
Hello, everybody. I'm Elliott Washer. I'm co-founder of Big Picture Learning. Um, we have schools that start with the interests and choices of each and every student in our schools, where they're connected to real-world learning through mentors and internships we call learning through interests or internships. And we have about 150 schools around the world, and our work is to influence public education systems around the world through our schools and innovative practices.
Elliot, can you give us a few examples of the countries that Big Picture Learning is present in?
Sure. US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Kenya, Italy. Today I'm with 8 people from the UK that are starting a school in January in Doncaster, the Netherlands, all over. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with a first question for you guys. And my first question will be, can you cite maybe 2 or 3 key findings in learning sciences that you find compelling and that you apply on a daily basis, that you incorporate in your practice to better convey the learning to the students and or to the teachers?
Sure. Sure. I certainly agree that we know very little. Sometimes we think we know more than we know. But having said that, we do know sometimes our eyes are pretty good indicators, and that our instruments follow and our evidence follows. But in the case of Big Picture, we've known for a long time that relationships are key to learning, and that what you want to get better at, what you're interested and motivated to get better at, you want to get better at. And we also know that you want to get better at those things with people who you choose to get better at them with. That runs real deep in who we are as people and the things that we want to do and develop our cultures around that. Having said that, there's been a lot of work with 2 neurotransmitters, oxytocin and dopamine, that kind of bear that out. Well, oxytocin is a neurotransmitter that has a lot to do with relationships and bonding. And dopamine has a lot to do with how you get better at what you get better at. And in the neurosciences, and in a simply put way, finding that they work together. That has tremendous implications for all schools and all learning. And we know that. And that comes across in parenting and how infants even learn from their moms and dads, all the way to and through peer relationships and adult relationships that young people form in and outside of school. And what we've done is we've taken the advantage of that by putting the school as an intermediary, if you will, between inside of school learning and outside of school learning, and connecting what students want to get better at with people that they want to learn from, and bringing that back into school and developing interests and motivations in school and engagement around the academic work that schools are doing, but also what does that look like, which brings me to my next point, in a situated learning environment. So another piece that we really talk about is outcomes. And sometimes we miss the outcomes that are very valuable in front of us, that have to do more with neurosciences. And what I mean by that is we learn a lot through visualization, socialization, and imitation. And yet, where are those outcomes in our school's list of standards? Well, in the real world, and arguably in the school world, that's happening consciously or unconsciously all the time. And yet, when we're in school, it's much more delivered through doing something to somebody, instructing, instead of being with that person, which kind of, and following that person and facilitating the learning around interest and motivation and gearing up to understand where those are, and being with a person in a caring and compassionate way so they understand that you're building a relationship there. So the oxytocin, the dopamine, the imitation, visualization, socialization pieces that we're learning from the neurosciences are impacting schools. And I'll give you one more example. We talk a lot about performance, and we talk a lot about all students. And very arguably, the pieces that I mentioned are who we are as all. Also, diet, what we put in our bodies, sugar, fat, and salt in high quantities, that impacts our performance levels. Sleep impacts our performance levels. Exercise impacts our performance levels. We know this from the neurosciences. How are we really seriously paying attention to that in our schools when so much of the diets that young children are eating and older children are eating at home and in school are loaded with sugar, fat, and salt in high quantities that produce diabetes, cancer, heart disease, as well as impact performance on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis, if you look at the neurosciences, as well as sleep patterns, getting enough sleep, and getting enough exercise. So if we do those things and pay attention to them, it seems only logical and rational that we'd raise the performance levels of all students, and yet how much attention is really seriously given to that. So I'll stop there. You asked for 3. Those are probably 3 pretty good ones we can talk about.
Thank you. Yes, they are. And adding to sleep, there's same for sleep. We know little about sleep, but what is being hypothesized is that during sleep we sort of relive our day in a fast forward mode. So any learning that occurred during the day is consolidated during sleep. So that's why sleep is so important for children and for adults too. We tend to underestimate our needs.
Absolutely, and are we doing harm by that?
Mm-hmm.
Are we not doing as good as we can do? Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let's shift to educate.
Thank you so much. That was a very wonderful expression of what you're doing. I also love the part of exercise and sleeping. I would say our experience at Educate is quite different in terms of science part of it. I think we have been very critical at understanding what the youth today really need. And from the experience today, and even looking at Africa today, making sure that we mold students or learners who are able to solve community problems. We looked at what special skills can we provide to the students to be able to solve problems by themselves. Looking at courses like leadership and entrepreneurship course that we provide to schools, and that is integrated in the curriculums or in the policy frameworks that is able to enable, teachers, is able to enable the instructors on how and what they teach. But again, I would also want to say that if you want to influence learning, you have to bear in mind that learners learn through experience. Learners learn better when they are facilitated and coached. Learners are also able to learn better when they are given challenging tasks. And also if they are given an opportunity to apply what they have learned in real life experience, because that's when they realize the value of education. We want them to be able to see that whatever that they are learning at school is able to be applied. And in that case, they should be asking questions to the teacher that how is this important and how can we apply it. Again, looking at that, that's why we are also tasked and challenged with supporting teachers in terms of pedagogy. We have a collaborative, well-structured pedagogy that can support that kind of conducive environment to the learners. If you are saying that they learn through experience, the teacher will of course need those special skills on how do you give, for instance, challenging tasks to a student so that they're able to apply given theories, given processes in real life experience. So from our experience and from our research so far, we have found out that the scholars and students that we have supported so far have been able to double their incomes just because they have received the entrepreneurship skills. They've been able to double their incomes. We have also found that more than 64% of the scholars also, when they graduate, are able to find jobs because of that experience that they went through while they were learning. So I would say that that's a brief description of our model and the impact so far that it has caused, that I would say.
Thank you very much for this. Great. And I will add to this discussion as, so we create games to teach emotional intelligence to students at Better Kids, and we work very closely with neuroscientists. And I would say from our perspective, the 3 or 4, I would say, principles that we applied, and that is facilitated by digital experience is, first of all, is active engagement. So we make sure that there's a lot of interaction and that there are actions required from the players and students on our side. Second is immediate feedback. So there's been interesting experiences where different groups of students were given assignments by teachers, and one of them said, I'll give you your grades right after this session, and the other said, I'll give you your grades in 2 weeks. And the one who has delayed feedback didn't perform as well. So games and the digital world for this is great because obviously you can give immediate feedback, which is harder in real life. And then the last one is focus. As you all know, we're always distracted by a million things, and our brain is constantly making sure that we try and stay on task. So trying not to distract students with different unnecessary solicitations is really something we work hard on, as well as consolidation and scaffolded learning. So when you learn something one day, we make sure it's reinvested in a way or another further down in the learning journey, because that's how we all learn. So let's take a step, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the different countries that you are working with. Are you seeing, what are the differences that you're seeing in terms of evolution in learning sciences applied to education? And can you give us a few examples of countries that might have shifted their policies, or were there interesting examples that might be inspirational for us all?
I guess I can start. So a few things come to mind once again around the pieces around places where we work all over that deal with developing relationships with people in the community around things that students want to get better at. And those are a lot of times cultural, who they are and how they connect themselves to their culture, past, present, and future, and what their culture brings to the future, which is real important. That is a lot of times ignored in schools around how people learn. So, for example, once again in schools, most of the delivery is instructional and text-based, where in most cultures, the delivery of learning and how we learn comes from imitation, once again, visualization, socialization, relationships, and what you really want to get better at. And those pieces play out all over in how students connect what they're learning in school to the outside world. So I'll give you an example, and sometimes I don't like to give examples from our school, although I certainly can. I'll give you two. One is I was watching a video the other day of 3 young women from Kinsale, Ireland, and they learned something, and it was around the Google Science Fair, and they were learning something in school about geography and world hunger in their class that connected them to what they were passionate about, which was solving a gigantic problem around hunger. And it just so happened that one of the young women was in the garden with her mom and discovered something about the legumes they were pulling up and the pods. And that led them to talk to their biochemistry teacher, or microbiology teacher, excuse me. And then they went off together and started doing hundreds of thousands or over 100,000 tests on plants around water resistance and disease resistance to produce better beans and legumes. That was inspired by relationships with the mom, compassion and caring, connections to the school, and the outside world interests of the girls, where they took their own time and did all that work. And yesterday, I was with a she's an environmentalist and works at the Botanical Gardens in Providence as a docent and an explainer. Is going to have a degree in as a herbologist, probably, or something in the environmental movement. She's organized the school and schools around eating a plant-based meal, 1 meal a day. All of that comes out of her culture about being plant-based and bringing that relationship and those cultural experiences back into the school to be caring and compassionate around health reasons, where she's picking up her biology from being at the Botanical Gardens, working with people, and she has a fantastic mentor where they've had a relationship for over 2 years, who's going to play a major role, probably, you can't predict the future, in Jada's life going forward as she goes off to college. So the pieces around this work are pretty universal. The things that I tried to give examples that I mentioned that would be part of any and all aspects of people's cultures, to be able to bring those into schools in significant ways that right now there's little thought about. And that's what would engage and motivate students around doing better in school.
Thank you so much, Elliott, for those examples. It's nice to travel in those different settings.
Learning is mostly influenced by doing. And looking at Rwanda, for instance, the fact that we are going through competence-based learning curriculum, a lot of expectations from our stakeholders, and more so the students, are so high, looking at the fact that they expect teaching and learning to be totally different I remember when we had started launching our model in one of the schools, and we are training, the teachers at school. Some students had a chance to peep around and see what is happening. And I could say that combining the models that you are applying is almost what we do here. Because, for instance, the curriculum expects that it should be able to influence and enable learners to learn through games and plays, to learn through engagements and collaborations within class. And so kids moving around were seeing a different mood of learning in the classroom, and they're wondering why they're missing it in their class. So one of the questions that I was asked as I was getting out was, why can't you give this as well to us? Because it was very motivating and exciting on the side of the learners. And to me, that's what influences learning. Emotionally, if people are enjoying learning, they shouldn't perceive learning as something that they have to memorize, they have to grasp, they have to run, they have to, they should perceive it as something that is enjoyable, as something that is quite going to impact their lives. Again, skills-based learning also as well, I would say, as one of the good examples I've seen. One of the things that we also prove that skills-based learning and our model is very important because it has made students create projects for themselves through exhibitions, where students are able to exhibit different projects that are solving community problems. You can't imagine how the stakeholders within the community come and see, and they will prove that actually learning is taking place by just looking at what learners have been able to make out of what they learned at school level. And everyone is so expectant. And this year we are going to be able to do national exams for the first time. We are going to be able to assess what learners have been doing in the curriculum nationally. And I'm very sure that everyone is expecting a change. So looking at that kind of experience, I would say that the stakeholders, the government, is backing us up to make sure that we scale and we go beyond 300 schools, for instance, that we're supporting in Rwanda, so that everyone receives this kind of approach beyond just policy and curriculum. That they are given support, they are coached, teachers are coached, teachers are mentored, so that they use a very collaborative method of teaching in their classroom. So I would say that testimonies are coming up that they're experiencing a very critical change.
Thank you for this. Now, add just a few words on Europe and the focus there in two countries I know a little bit about, which is France and the UK. I think both countries are very conversant with the fact that learning sciences have a lot to bring to education. However, there's still a big contrast because although in the UK, I think about 30% of schools are participating in research proactively and are letting scientists conduct experiments in school settings. It's not the case yet in France, and so there's a bit of a paradox where people want more science-based learning, but at the same time, it's hard for scientists to actually conduct experiments in schools and make progress on their research. So I think for policymakers, it'd be great to try and foster more collaboration between the two worlds of research and educators and schools. And so focusing on schools right now, if I have two questions for you. The first question is, what is your dream for the next 10 years in terms of learning for your organizations? And the second question is, what would be a simple piece of advice that you can share with a teacher that might be in our audience today and that would be immediately activable on their side. So something simple that they can take away and apply in their classroom starting tomorrow.
Well, I guess the work that we're doing, I hope, has influence around connecting schools to outside of school learning and in situated learning environments where the skill sets and the personal qualities that students are picking up are qualified by people who are qualified in the real world. So, for example, a new book came out of Julia Freeland Fisher's book called Who You Know. Our work is, they do some nice evaluation of our work in that book, because schools basically give out diplomas and certifications around what you know, content. But in the real world, what you know and who knows what you know and who you choose to know from are all connected. And this is borne out in the neurosciences and psychology and sociology and anthropology, that those meshworks are very, very important. So my dream would be for schools to pay attention to the productive things that students are doing outside of school so that they can engage them inside of school and deepen that learning and those skill sets that bring in the academic pieces, as well as the other pieces about how we also learn, and count those, because every student is different. So that's my dream, is blending into, what would I say to each and every teacher out there, administrator, would be to pay attention to who's in front of you. We have a little expression, and I don't know whose quote who's the person to acknowledge the quote to, but we kind of always say, if our instruments were only as good as our eyes, we'd have a lot of evolution in our bodies and our senses that tell us things that we must pay attention to, and look at each and every student, what motivates them, how they're learning, who they want to be connected to, what books they want to read, what people they want to meet, what places they want to go to, and what are their big dreams. And to avoid, oh, you can't do this because, you can't do that because you don't have any money, or you can't travel, you can't do and so it's those limiting factors. But instead, pay attention to who's in front of you. Listen real carefully, because, and I do know who to attribute this quote to. We do mile wide, inch deep. Van Gogh said, as you go deep, you learn many things. So it's both, it's the other way around. It's try to go deep, and they're going deep outside, and they may be going deep inside. Get the relationships going. Qualify those learnings with people on the outside, so people have access. It's an equity issue to have access to people who know what you know. It can't be left just to people who have the wealth and access. Every child needs access to people that they want to meet, who they know in productive ways around what they want to learn, and how to bring that back into school. So that would be what I would say. It could be done tomorrow. Pay attention to who's in front of you, what their interests, motivations are, what they're doing in the outside, and bring that into school.
Thank you, Elliott. That's very inspiring. And we know that on back to school days, there are schools where teachers come together and they have all the names of all their students, and together they make sure that they all know some students, all of the students well enough. And so it's a good way, it's a good exercise to highlight, are there any students we don't know much about and whose motivations we're not aware of. So get your teachers together, and you can do that exercise as well, and see who's missing. Great. Let's shift to educate and your dreams at Educate.
Thank you. Our dream is just one simple one. We dream and we aim that we fully incorporate skills-based learning model in all national or government educational systems across Africa. We dream that the curriculums are able to will be able to incorporate skills-based learning across all the subjects where learners are given a chance to learn by doing in day-to-day normal teaching and learning in classroom. If that can be, if it can be able to happen and be adopted in all the curriculums across Africa, I'm sure that education won't be the same again. One simple advice I also have for the teachers who's listening in is try as much as you can to influence and change how you teach, because how you teach is what creates an entrepreneur, is what creates an engineer, is what creates a doctor, is what creates a better teacher, is what creates someone who will look at the world in a positive approach, who look at influencing and changing the world differently. So I would say that applying a very collaborative pedagogical approach in classroom would be able to change learners. And also bear in mind that as a teacher, you are a mentor. You are a mentor, you are a coach, you should be very close to your students. You should make sure that you ask them the challenges they are facing. And day by day, you adopt your teaching practices. It will make the learners, be able to apply some of the things that you're teaching them. I would also say that it would also be ideal if you're a teacher and you give the learners a platform where you can be able to test, assess, and measure that learning is taking place. Just for instance, the fact that at Educate we are selling into the use of business clubs into schools. The simple clubs, a simple platform where you will go and test things, where you'll be able to see what learners are doing, where you'll be able to see that learners are now creating, they are adopting, they are, using different approaches that you have taught them in class to apply them in real life. So I would say that would be the simple example that I could give to an instructor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. This is certainly actionable. And well, I'll share our dream at Better Kids. I think is that every student is given a chance to build a strong emotional foundation. We resonate with Elliotts Approach in saying that motivation is key, and also the paying attention to students and their difficulties is important as well. So my hope and my advice to teachers is instead, when you see a disruptive behavior in a classroom, pay attention to it in a way that you don't send the kid for a timeout, but rather ask him to think about what is the emotion he or she is having difficulty. He or she is having difficulty. Regulating right now. So instead of saying stop misbehaving, rather say I can see you're having a difficulty with an emotion. What is it, and where is it coming from? And let's work together to get you past this difficulty. Let's address maybe one last question before we shift to questions that have been asked by our audience today. And my question to you would be, we talked about skills-based learning, but as we know, we live in a world where things are shifting at a very rapid pace. So it's not always so easy to know what are the skills that will be applicable in 10 years from now. What is your perspective for each of you as to how artificial intelligence might impact learning, be it positively or negatively or in a different way?
We're real good at solving problems as a race. Human beings are pretty good at that. Arguably, we cause some as well, and that's what we do. We deal with situations in the places that we're in, and we try to figure out ways to solve those problems. It used to be we'd use rules of thumb, and now we're which are general, broadly say, are heuristics. And now we rely more and more on algorithms. There's some dangers in that, of course, about how you look good to a machine really is can give you some very funny and humorous results whenever you're on a machine and it gives you feedback around who it thinks you are. At the same time, that work is evolving. But I'm basically really about how can our technologies improve our relationships and ways to learn and get along better, rather than taking over for our maybe machine relationships and neglecting and leaving out our humanity. So I think we're in a kind of we're always in a precarious place as people. This is one of those places where without our humanness and humanity in it, I worry about where things go with just technological skill sets that there has to be work in conjunction with, and how can artificial intelligence or technologies advance what we're doing with people in mind, body and spirit, not just mind. Our minds are out in the world. We're not just in our heads. And that's a piece of neuroscience that neuroscientists really do talk about. If you're out in the world, it's different than just being in your head. And your body is out in the world, and you're sensing and feeling the world. So these pieces, and I don't mean to digress here too much, these pieces are kind of real fascinating about how we really do move forward on keeping ourselves in the midst of the technology, so it doesn't overwhelm us, and it doesn't reflect who we are or the other species in the planet are.
Thank you.
At Educate, we are evidence-based. We are evidence-based, and we are very keen to travel and be at par according to how changes have come in. That's why we use things like RCT, we do pilots, we have different types of research happening to make sure that we understand that in the government, at school level, how are things changing. As you said, that skills-based learning, of course, would need to be able to approach it. You need to be very dynamic because things are always changing, looking at the trends of the world today. And I would also say that the government always review curriculums every after 3 years, and that gives us, as technical advisors, a chance to adopt the skills that are very crucial and necessary at the moment, bearing in mind that things have changed. I would also say that the fact that our approach, which we call skills-based learning, which is more skills-based learning by using of skills-based pedagogy, which is skills lab. It is very collaborative, and so when the teacher is in classroom via groups, seeing how learners are asking questions, what they are learning, even the teacher is supposed to be able to, adopt his teaching, his question approach, his ways of assessing students according to the needs of learners in the real class before even the policies have changed. It is the teacher who needs to be adaptive, bearing in mind that we have learners of different backgrounds. The teacher is supposed to be inclusive centered in the classroom. The teacher is supposed to understand that he is faced with learners who have different experiences, and through the learner's experience, the teacher is supposed to adopt his teaching approaches, give learners a chance to share findings of what they are seeing in their communities. And I would say that teaching and learning is a collective effort, not just the teacher bringing information on the plate or just teaching, but also listening from the students. What are their experiences? What are they finding in societies? What are they finding in their communities? What are their challenges? And then they adapt them to suit the teaching needs in the classroom. So the teacher as well should be able to be at the center of adoption, given different changes. The government also is supposed to review the curriculum every after 3 years. And as I said, as technical advisors, we are able to come in and give support. On top of that, our research that is always happening gives us the background of the skills we need to adopt and how best we need to support the governments and schools we work with.
Thank you. Let's take advantage of the last few minutes to address questions from our audience. There was a question for Elliott about how, Elliott, you discuss how learning needs to be personalized and focused on each child's dreams and interests, but can this model be scaled, particularly in developing countries with low budget?
Absolutely. Personalized means that there's people involved. There's a person. And technology is used with judgments of people. They are adults in and outside of school. So that's one piece. The definition of personalized has got many definitions out there. So just be clear about that there's a person. Two, biologically, and if you look at us culturally, that's exactly what happens, what we do. We just made it into school. So school has to pay more attention, once again, to who's in front of them, what their interests are. Interests lead to career choices, to allow students to express their agency in productive ways because there's adults around them, not just their peers, who know what they're interested in and how to connect that to school. If you don't do that, you're creating a learn and forget design that we've had for a long time. And you're creating lots of inefficiencies in what students are learning that there's nothing to really stick it to, be it people, objects, places, where the information that they have that's going to turn into knowledge and hopefully wisdom when they spend a long time getting better at those things can be used to problem solve in the situations that they're going to be in. So Whether schools pay attention to this or not, this is really how we learn, in a personalized way, where we do connect all the time to people. It's a question of who we connect to and how we facilitate that. We do have affinities for the things that we're interested in and the dreams that we have. And it doesn't matter when we've done work in the toughest places, in the toughest cities, in the toughest rural areas, where people say, sometimes in a pessimistic way, young people don't have dreams, hopes, aspirations, and interests. They do. By the time you're 3 years old, you're already selecting things that you want to get better at and people that you want to show you how to get better at those things. I don't care if it's tying a shoe or putting your shirt on. You're saying, I got to do this better, and I want grandma to show me how to do it better. That's basically how we're learning. Using that kind of information and knowledge and wisdom in schools is imperative. It's not just about doing something to somebody. It's being with somebody, as was pointed out by Roger and I. So those pieces are real important around personalization and are using our biology to influence what we're doing inside of schools and outside of schools. And of course it's possible. It's what we do all the time. We have a system that is highly disengaging to many students. It's not dealing with the issues and problems of, how can you learn if you're hungry? How can you learn if you didn't sleep well? All right? Yes. If you really didn't sleep well, if you're really hungry, all right? How can you learn if you're really tired? So if you just keep going and turning the page, what kind of learning are you going to get from that? So we have to pay attention to these things, and we have to be caring and compassionate around each and every one of our students. And I believe that's what teachers really want to do. I truly believe that. So that's part of the work, along with the development of the skill sets and the academics and the interests, and moving our young people into their futures.
Thank you, Elliott. We have 1 more minute for the last question, which was about, aren't the principles of focus and immediate feedback contradictory in terms of learning experience? I'll take this one. The focus means that you focus on one learning objective. As you know, we can't double task, especially not when we're learning a new task and our prefrontal cortex is so highly solicited. The feedback, the immediate feedback part, is more in terms of retrieval of information. So there's a phase where you learn and you're focused. And when we were talking about immediate feedback, it means that when I'm asking a student about a learning that already happened to make sure that he or she can retrieve it, then I should be able to give him immediate feedback so his brain can validate or invalidate the assumption that was made when they shared an answer with me. So they can work together nicely. Great. Thank you so much, Elliott and Rogers, for your participation today. It was fascinating learning from your different organizations and countries and perspectives. So we truly appreciate, and I'd like to thank WISE as well for facilitating this webinar today.